Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage President and Publisher of Encounter Books, Roger Kimball.
Well, good evening. Good evening. I'm told that among cognoscenti, the bulletin which just solicited our attention with such stentorian force is known fondly as the voice of God. I cannot speak for the authenticity of that attribution, but neither can I in good faith deny the accuracy of its message. On information and belief, that is to say, I've long been constrained to admit that I am Roger Kimball, and furthermore, that I'm the president and publisher of Encounter Books. As such, it is my grateful duty to welcome you all to these splendid surroundings to celebrate Encounter's nearly 25 years of incisive and politically mature commentary on some of the most pressing issues of our time. I'm pleased that we have more than a few Encounter authors with us tonight. They're scattered about the room, for they are the instigators of that political maturity, that mature commentary. Their work has done much to illuminate public discourse, unsettle the complacency, and correct the errors of our would-be masters in the corridors of power, to bring to the rank and fetid, unsafe spaces of academia and the punditocracy some of the hygienic ingenuity that Hercules brought to the Augean stables. So thank you, Encounter authors, for your labors on behalf of the Republic. Now, a word about our place of celebration. As your invitation informed you, this is Anderson House. It was originally the winter residence of the American diplomat Lars Anderson and his wife Isabel. We are delighted to be able to assemble in a spot that is not only beautiful, and hence a goad to civilization, but also so instinct with noble history. Built in 1905, this Beaux-Arts treasure is now home to the Society of the Cincinnati, a hereditary group founded in 1783 to memorialize the American Revolutionary War and the famous declaration that justified its prosecution. If Encounter Books had a founding document, it could well come from the opening paragraphs of Jefferson's immortal manifesto. Let facts be submitted to a candid world. I've often thought of printing that motto on the cover page of all of our books. Maybe I will start to do that. Thank you to Anderson House and to its director, Anderson Morris, for hosting us tonight. We're pleased to be here. And I'm told by Mr. Morris that despite his name, there's no connection between him and the original Mr. Anderson. He seems sad about that, but still we're happy to be here. Now, I want to thank all of you for coming to help us trip the light fantastic and to celebrate my friend Heather McDonald, the 2022 winner of our Jeane Kirkpatrick Prize for Academic Freedom. I know that those two words don't really go together very well these days. Academic freedom, we're trying to change that. And Dr. Scott Atlas, this year's winner of the Encounter Prize for Advancing American Ideals. Their example underscores the truth of Aristotle's observation that courage is the most important of the virtues, because without it, we are unable to practice any of the others. We will be hearing more about and from both honorees after we refresh our tissues with the delicious repast provided by the culinary geniuses of Design Cuisine. You can consider that a plug for their great work. But for now, I would like to thank the many individuals and institutions that made tonight possible. Together, you helped us raise nearly $600,000 to aid Encounter in its efforts at world conquest. I'm happy to report that effort at world conquest is making progress, and a very obstinate task, and I and my colleagues are deeply grateful for your generosity. We couldn't do it without you. I'd like to mention in particular the leadership donors to this event tonight, the Lined and Harry Bradley Foundation, which is the conditio sine qua non of so many enlightened conservative endeavors, the Kleinschmidt Family Foundation, and the Thomas W. Smith Foundation. Thank you, all of you, for what you do and for your vote of confidence in our work. Now, to continue on the subject of thanks, I want to mention the congregation of Jeeves-like experts at the Hewell Events Group. If God is in the details, as I've been assured he is, then I hope he is planning to engage their services for future festivities. Their cheerful and efficient ministrations would save him a world of bother. That's my second plug. Finally, it is a pleasure to recognize my dedicated colleagues at Encounter Books, several of whom are with us tonight. Emerson said that an institution is the lengthened shadow of one man. But about this, as about so many things, that transcendental windbag was wrong. I know from my own experience that what we do at Encounter would not be possible without the talent and hard work of my colleagues, and I'm pleased to have this occasion to recognize their efforts on our behalf. Thank you. So this is the moment when I invoke General Douglas MacArthur and say I shall return. Thank you again. Please enjoy your table fare, the scintillating conversation of your table mates, and what Alexander Pope, imitating Horace, called the feast of reason and the flow of soul. I'll be back.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome back to the stage, Roger Kimball.
All right, I'm back. Now, as many of you know, the world headquarters of Encounter Books is not here in this building yet, but it's located on the island of Manhattan in the irregularly beating heart of the city of New York. As I've had occasion to talk with many people tonight about New York, the sentiment seems to be universal. It's not what it once was. With every passing day, it seems, it descends a little further into chaos, incivility, filth, and violence. A principal reason for this is that Ray Kelly is no longer police commissioner of the city. Among many other distinctions, Ray was not only the longest-serving police commissioner in the city's history, but also the only person to serve 2 non-consecutive terms. Now, I want to go on record tonight to suggest that Ray please make history again and become the first person to serve 3 non-consecutive terms. Come back, Ray. We need you. In the meantime, I'm delighted that you are on hand to introduce Heather McDonald, the Thomas W. Smith Fellow at the Manhattan Institute and scourge of the feckless and politically correct wherever they congregate and shiver. Champion of beauty and civilization, and tireless supporter of the men in blue. We are very proud at Encounter to have published her book, The War on Cops, a few years back, and you will find a copy of that waiting for you later this evening. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Raymond Kelly.
Well, thank you very much, Roger. And it's certainly my honor to introduce Heather McDonald as tonight's honoree and recipient of the Jeane Kirkpatrick Prize for Academic Freedom. This is an award which Heather has truly earned by putting her own reputation and her own body on the front line against the forces of intellectual intolerance and left-wing violence. There are few scholars or journalists working anywhere who are as brave as she is. And it's no exaggeration to say that Heather McDonald is the de facto spokesperson for law enforcement in America today. There are thousands of police officers who would certainly agree with that. At a time when public intellectuals trim their sails to the winds of extreme political correctness for fear of being canceled, Heather sets her course by the true north of truth, and rough seas and hot air be damned. Heather McDonald is the Thomas W. Smith Fellow at Manhattan Institute and a contributing editor to City Journal. She has written incisively about such disparate matters as immigration, policing, homelessness, drug policy, the terrible state of higher education, the myth of implicit racial bias, and just to keep us guessing, the opera. She earned her bachelor's degree from Yale, where she studied English literature, and considered a career in academia as a literary critic, but turned away from a profession that was increasingly in the grips of doctrinaire academic unfreedom. Heather received her law degree from Stanford Law School and clerked for Federal Circuit Court Judge Stephen Reinhardt, Jimmy Carter's last appointment to the bench. As the author of New York Times best-selling book of 2016, War on Cops, which you're all going to get a copy of, Heather coined and popularized the phrase, the Ferguson effect, following the civil unrest and anti-police violence that emerged after the justified shooting of Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri in 2014. The Ferguson effect describes a rise in crime in cities that have experienced significant public agitation against law enforcement. And the media, by promoting the disinformation that innocent black men face a significant threat of murder by police, has prompted public safety officers to disengage from discretionary enforcement activity. Now, this disengagement has emboldened the nation's criminal element. This thesis has been borne out by the sharp rise in crime that followed the George Floyd riots of 2020 and demands from even mainstream politicians to defund the police. Heather's 2018 book, The Diversity Delusion, took aim at the obsession of race and identity that has captured the media, academia, government, and boardrooms. With her relentless rigor and insistence on looking at what the data really says and not what advocates want it to say, she pierces the shroud of rhetoric and wishful thinking about the so-called disparate impact in our country. Her work is a cold, sober shower of fact about diversity, equity, and inclusion, the new woke trinity which the progressives demand we all kneel to. For 30 years, Heather McDonald has steadily spoken up about the lies that infect every corner of our culture. Lies based on an ideology of resentment, ugliness, and frustration. She is routinely the object of protests and threats of violence and has been forced to address empty auditoriums in order to ensure her safety. At the same time, she is a fearless journalist who doesn't hesitate to explore the darker corners of our decaying urban environments in order to get the truth of what's happening there. Heather is a truth teller of the highest order, and we need her insight and wisdom now more than ever. So please join me in welcoming Heather to the stage here.
Here it is.
Wow. Commissioner Kelly, thank you so much for that magnificent, generous introduction. As Roger said, the last time that New York was actually safe was when Ray Kelly was running the show. And given how New York City residents voted in the last election, hint, I don't mean NYPD blue, it's not clear that we ever deserved him. So I agree with Roger, please come back. Now, with a topic like free speech, the current moment undoubtedly calls for a reference to Elon Musk and his heroic attempts to liberate Twitter from the tech censors. Unfortunately, the only thing I know about Mr. Musk is that he built Roger Kimball's car. So I thought I'd begin by invoking a different American hero, the woman whose name graces this wonderful award. In 1982, student agitators prevented Jeane Kirkpatrick from speaking at several campuses across the country in protest against U.S. policy in Central America. Hecklers silenced Ambassador Kirkpatrick at the University of California, Berkeley, and at the University of Minnesota. Imagine the aggression needed to silence Jeane Kirkpatrick. Smith College told her that it could not assure her safety during a commencement address, so the address was canceled. Well, you may be thinking, business as usual. In fact, the reaction of campus administrators and even students themselves to the shutdown seemed to come from a different world. The chancellor of the University of California announced his embarrassment that his university had, quote, succumbed to mob rule. UC regents demanded that an apology be sent to Kirkpatrick. Even the group that organized the Berkeley protest, Students Against Intervention in El Salvador, admitted that the heckling had gone too far. The group had no intent, it said, to curtail the speech of those who, quote, disagree with us. As anti-military protests spread across the country, the American Association of University Professors, the United States Student Association, and other academic bodies denounced the use of the heckler's veto and asked faculty and students to reaffirm our traditional commitment to freedom to speak and to listen. Fast forward to 2015. A group of Black Yale students scream and curse at Yale sociologist Nicholas Christakis for what seemed an eternity, preventing him from addressing them. "Be quiet," shrieked one. "You are disgusting." "It's not a debate," screamed another student. "Merely invoking free speech," said yet another student, "creates a, quote, space to allow for violence to happen on this campus." Yale's president, Peter Salovey, rushed to express his sympathies, not with the beleaguered Christakis, but with his tormentors. Quote, "Their concerns and cries for help made clear that some students find life on our campus profoundly difficult." If this were not nauseating enough, Salovey thanked the rabble for offering him the opportunity to, quote, listen to and learn from you. What a president. This episode proved a template. In 2016, Emory students demanded protection from a few Trump 2016 slogans that had been chalked on campus sidewalks. Trump's name exacerbated the, quote, unsafety of minority students, they said. Emory's president validated what he called the students', quote, pain in the face of this perceived intimidation. The chalkers would be tracked down and subjected to the, quote, conduct violation process. And Emory would implement yet more diversity bureaucracy to protect students from harmful speech. In 2017, hundreds of UC Berkeley faculty called for canceling a talk by provocateur Milo Yiannopoulos on the ground that its content would, quote, harm students. The faculty got their wish. Black-masked anarchists and beat and pepper-sprayed would-be attendees, hurled flaming rockets at the auditorium where Yiannopoulos was supposed to speak, and ransacked city businesses. Afterwards, several Berkeley professors lauded the rioters for shutting down the event through what one professor called, quote, very efficient attacks on university property. Getting beaten up by left-wingers, we learned, or losing your livelihood is not a, quote, harm, to borrow a phrase that today's academic left recognizes. In 2018, University of Chicago professors circulated a petition denouncing a planned debate between Steve Bannon and a business school professor. The debate would, quote, threaten the safety of people of color on and off campus, the signatories said. The debate never occurred. In June 2022, the dean of the University of Pennsylvania Law School asked the faculty senate to, ideally, fire tenured law professor Amy Wax because of the, quote, severe harms she had inflicted on the Penn community with her challenges to campus orthodoxies regarding racial preferences, immigration, and sex differences. Apologies for offending speech are now all but de rigueur. In 2021, an astronomer retracted an article proposing a method for predicting scientists' future research impact. The project was said to conflict with equity. Groveled the astronomer, quote, I now see that my work has hurt people. I apologize to you all for the stress and pain that I have caused. The authors of another retracted study comparing male and female mentors in STEM expressed, quote, deep regret for having caused pain. In August 2022, the president of the American Historical Association criticized contemporary history writing for imposing a presentist lens on the past. He seems to have been surprised by the resulting uproar. Within 2 days, he had apologized for the, quote, harm the article had caused to colleagues, the discipline, and the association. He would hope to, quote, redeem himself by learning and listening. Good luck with that. His days are numbered. The private sector has become as eager to prevent alleged harm to its employees from contrarian speech. In 2018, Google fired computer scientist James Damore for having suggested in a memo that males and females have different interests and personality traits. Who would have thought? These differences, Damore proposed, helped explain why Google's engineers are not 50% female. Heresy. Damore had to go because he had, quote, hurt Google's employees, announced the CEO. Booksellers are disappearing books. Payment services are blocking donations to disfavored commentators because those books and those commentators allegedly harm vulnerable victim groups. The Biden administration is bringing government's vast resources down upon, quote, disinformation. Scott Atlas will tell you about that. So what has changed between the early 1980s and today? The conquest of every mainstream institution by an idea that Ambassador Kirkpatrick memorably identified in 1984. The progressive left always blames America first, she said in a GOP convention speech. Kirkpatrick was referring to foreign affairs, but you would not have been surprised by the spread of the blame America first instinct to every aspect of domestic life and indeed to the entirety of Western civilization. After all, she had invoked Jean-François Revel's warning that a civilization that, quote, feels guilty for everything it is and does will lack the energy and conviction to defend itself. And so today, the elites themselves are waging war on meritocratic standards, on our civilizational inheritance, and on the West's unparalleled accomplishments, all in the name of atoning for what is said to be America and the West's unique racism and cruelty towards the so-called other. The blame America first instinct lies behind the war on speech. The novel justification for today's censorship is the maudlin claim that dissenting speech harms favored victim groups. The reason they are so easily harmed is that they are already barely surviving in the maelstrom of oppression that is allegedly the United States. So vulnerable are these victims that they can be struck down, nay, even unto death, by ideas they don't like. The Democratic establishment labels those disagreeable ideas hate speech. If you think that Americans have the right to decide who crosses their borders, you are engaged in hate speech. If you think that doctors should be selected based on their scientific knowledge, not based on their race, you are engaged in hate speech. If you think that sex differences are written into our chromosomes and cannot be changed by fiat or by castration, you are engaged in hate speech. And hate speech, the new dogma goes, may be banned, since it is not really speech, but rather conduct, assaultive conduct against the marginalized. This definitional shift is at the core of the contemporary push for censorship. So how do we restore our freedoms? Well, we could try to give the left-wing establishment a crash course in the revolutionary breakthrough that is the First Amendment. Our academic elites believe that the only speech that deserves protection is speech with which the left agrees or which the government deems true. These opinion leaders portray the constitutional ban on censorship as a ploy used by the majority to maintain power, rather than, as Frederick Douglass understood, a key protection for minorities and dissenters to break up illegitimate power. They have no appreciation for the marketplace of ideas and the difficult dialectical process of truth-seeking. But it's going to be hard to get those propositions accepted as long as America and the West are cast as racist oppressors, and as long as alleged victimhood is the most coveted status in elite circles today. So we are going to have to take on the lies about American civilization directly. We must assert at every opportunity that the unique features of the West are its passion for discovery and exploration, its hunger to systematically understand the workings of nature, the development of limited government, and the concepts of tolerance and of equality before the law. The West is not distinguished by domination and exploitation. Those practices have been present in every human society and are still the norm in many countries today. Only the West created the principles with which to rein in the human drive for abuse of power. Every battle against the West that the left fights today in the name of equity is being fought with Western intellectual ammunition. We must assert at every opportunity that high standards, whether in academic achievement or public behavior, are not racist. And when we are called racist anyway, for standing up for meritocracy and the rule of law, we must never, ever, as Jeane Kirkpatrick understood, apologize. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Heather, for that admonitory call to arms. Once again, we are in your debt. That was a marvelous talk. It is my honor now to introduce my friend Dr. Larry Arnn, American patriot, Churchill scholar, and president of Hillsdale College, the best college in the United States. Many of you will know that one of my specialties is writing disobliging things about the educational establishment, that thoroughly corrupt wasteland devoted to subverting the very culture it was entrusted to preserve and transmit. Hillsdale is a conspicuous, perhaps the single most conspicuous exception to that dreary, toxic, and mephitic swamp. Over the last few years, a lot has been written about Hillsdale's astonishing rise in the sweepstakes of academic achievement, especially the quickly rising quality of its students and faculty. But anyone who has looked into what goes on at the college knows that the intellectual component is only part of what makes Hillsdale the envy of academic scorekeepers. For Hillsdale is about educating the whole person, which means educating men and women for citizenship in a democratic republic, and beyond that, guiding them in the quest for the good and the fully human. One of the things that cannot fail to strike visitors to Hillsdale is the climate of comity, of respect, and though it sounds corny, of love that prevails on campus. Hillsdale is a genuine community devoted to ordered liberty and the pursuit of truth. That character is largely the legacy of Larry Arnn's tenure at the helm, and it is something that makes him the ideal person to introduce Dr. Scott Atlas. Scott is a senior fellow at the Hoover Institution at Stanford, as well as a founding fellow of Hillsdale's Academy for Science and Freedom. He is also one of the most vilified dissenters from the warped orthodoxy regarding the best response to our latest Chinese import, the COVID-19 virus. Scott's prominence as a spokesman for sanity in the Trump administration on this subject made him an easy target for the malevolent would-be totalitarians that cropped up like chokeweed wherever bureaucrats congregated. His own university, acting as if Orwell's 1984 were a how-to manual instead of a trenchant warning, treated him with abominable viciousness. The viciousness has abated, but assuredly it is not forgotten. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Larry P. Arnn to the stage.
These are hard years, and they have their blessings. I was saying to somebody tonight, it's not right to expect defeat, because you can always die trying, and that is honorable. Another blessing is we find out who our friends are. And my friendship with Roger has deepened in these years. It already existed, but, you know, I'm from Arkansas, and so I say, that guy's meaner than hell. Our speaker tonight has qualified himself for this award by exhibiting two attributes, one intellectual and one moral. The intellectual virtue, he shows, is understanding of public health. I get to work with brilliant people of fine character. Some of them are here tonight. And I know that their mastery gives rise, as it rises, to simplicity. Simplicity of explanation, simplicity of direction, moderation of intellectual claims, and the ability to show the way. The best scholars are like that. This man is like that. Ask him about the pandemic. It is relentlessly clear what he has to say. The other attributes are moral. Intellectual virtues cannot live without the moral virtues. Aristotle writes that if you're afraid of the flies buzzing around you, you will never be able to think of anything serious. If you take a stand against the pandemic or anything that's running hot, like Heather has done so many times, then you know that the hounds of hell themselves will be after you. Are you ready to do that? Can you keep your head when it happens? Can you keep on no matter what? Can you not be embittered by the experience? These are moral qualities of the highest order. I am grateful to Scott Atlas because he helped me keep my college open when it was under assault by the Wicked Witch of the Midwest. A title I learned from Roger Kimball. And she was just reelected by a big majority and got majorities in both houses of Congress, of the state legislature. And God knows what she's going to try to do with me. But it will cost her, because I have Scott to help me. I want you to know that I have seen him tested in battle. Still clear, still easy to understand, still sure, still never going too far beyond what he knows. I introduce to you a great man, Scott Atlas.
Well, thank you. I want to sincerely thank everyone at Encounter for this great honor. Roger, thanks to everyone involved. It's a great honor for me to be here, and especially to receive this from my colleague, my friend, and a true leader who I deeply respect and admire, Larry Arnn. It's a great blessing to have been given the opportunity, the rare opportunity, to help my country, my fellow citizens in a time of crisis. Most people never get that chance. To try to do so much good for so many, and I'm very thankful for having given that. I want to say to others who might find themselves in this situation that no matter how difficult it may seem to speak the truth against what seems to be a tidal wave of hostility, character assassination in national and international media, death threats, and no rebuttal, even from my own employer, it was never even a remote consideration to give up. Never. Why not? Well, because first, people were dying directly from grossly wrong policies advocated by incompetent bureaucrats and non-thinking academics. And those policies inflicted great harm on our children, on the poor, on society's most vulnerable. That had to be called out. Second, it became apparent that so many people really needed to hear the facts, spoken logically and very clearly. And I received thousands of emails, and if emails can be emotional, these were from people in every walk of life: priests, teachers, students, parents, seniors, fathers and mothers whose husbands and daughters were committing suicide from the isolation, begging me to keep speaking. There was no way to walk away from that. And third, I knew I had the backing of the strongest, truest person that I have ever known, my wife, who's sitting right here. The pandemic has been a great tragedy, there's no doubt, but it has exposed profound issues in this country that threaten the very principles of freedom that we Americans often take for granted. First, some facts to consider, because there's a context here that we must acknowledge, that under two administrations, Trump and Biden, the U.S. management of the pandemic was a gross failure. In deaths per million, among the worst compared to all of our peer nations. A straight line of increase over the course of the pandemic, no change in the slope of the line, even though a second administration had a vaccine. Any judgment of the United States response lies at the hands of Drs. Birx, Fauci, Redfield, the CDC, and the university experts who convinced officials to implement their lockdowns. They got what they wanted. Their policies were implemented throughout the country. Their policies failed and inflicted massive damage and destruction. That's fact. That's the data. But we have witnessed something far more fundamental than a pandemic mismanagement. We have a shocking failure in leadership in this country, one that has destroyed trust in important institutions that we need as a free-thinking, objective, and democratic society. And we are faced with a challenge now to restore that trust, and in a larger sense, to restore the essential values required of a free and ethical society. Why am I concerned about ethical values right now? Well, let's consider what happened here. Almost all of Western Europe recognized the spring 2020 data, proving the minuscule risk to healthy children for serious illness, and they opened the schools. Even during their otherwise stringent lockdowns, most of America's governors closed our schools for that school year. And what happened? Hundreds of thousands of child abuse cases went unreported, since schools are where most child abuse is reported. Mental health disorders in college age and teenagers skyrocketed. Self-harm by teenagers doubled to tripled. Overdoses and substance use disorders in teenagers increased by 40 to 120%. Massive learning losses, the largest score drops in math since the first assessments were done more than 30 years ago. And the sinful legacy of those who advocated for closing schools, including our largest teachers' unions, was highlighted in UNICEF's report on the state of global learning poverty. Quote, school closures disproportionately affected students from disadvantaged backgrounds. Learning losses are concentrated among poor students. I thought we were a society that cared about the poor and low-income families and prioritized children. Let's look at America's COVID vaccine policy. The United Kingdom, September 2021, quote, the margin of benefit is too small to advise universal vaccination of otherwise healthy teenagers. Finland's Ministry of Health, 2021, people under 16 who are not high risk will not be vaccinated in Finland. Norway, 2020 and 2022, quote, for children who are offered the vaccine, parents must consent, vaccines voluntary. Denmark, 2022, it will no longer be possible for children and young people under 18 to get the vaccine. The United States, October 26, 2021, quote, we're never going to learn how safe the vaccine is in children unless we start giving it. That's the way it goes, unquote. That's the FDA Advisory Committee on Pediatric Vaccines, Eric Rubin, MD, Editor-in-Chief, New England Journal. Across the United States, almost all colleges and universities required and still require vaccination, boosters, testing, and quarantining of healthy asymptomatic children. Back in 2020, before the vaccine, the CDC had on its website for schools, quote, it's unethical and illegal to test someone who does not want to be tested, unquote. That statement by the CDC is nowhere to be found. It's been removed from the website. Meanwhile, many of our so-called elite medical centers, Duke, Johns Hopkins, Stanford, among others, in a study sponsored by Pfizer, are engaged in an NIH trial of injecting healthy infants and toddlers with an experimental drug for a disease they have no significant risk from. Is that standard medical ethics? In April 2022, Moderna filed an emergency use authorization for their new multivalent vaccine in infants and toddlers, April 2022, based on a blood test of antibody level, not on protection for hospitalization or death. Why? No one died or was hospitalized, even in the placebo group. Not on protection from symptomatic infection, because it was not effective on the data they submitted. And by the way, why would an emergency use authorization be granted in April of 22 in children when there is no public health emergency in April of 2022 in children? And even if it were true that vaccines prevented the spread of the infection, which we know they do not by all the world's data, what kind of society uses its children as human shields for adults? Beyond the death and destruction, we have set up a public health disaster in our younger generation. During the lockdown, more than 50% of college-age kids had an unwanted weight gain, and that averaged 28 pounds during the lockdown. That's an obesity pandemic. And we have now taught toddlers and young children that they are a disease vector, that everyone is a danger to them and they are a danger to everyone else. I see these toddlers with masks in their strollers in Palo Alto. Mackey said, quote, "Of all the offspring of time, error is the most ancient and is so old and familiar an acquaintance that truth, when discovered, comes upon most of us like an intruder and meets the intruder's welcome." And what was the credentialed class's response to truth, especially our university campuses, the centers for the free exchange of ideas? Censorship, intimidation, censure. And let's understand very clearly, when you censor science and health policy, it's not simply an abstract evil, limiting discussion, a less than ideal environment for diversity of views and creativity. People die, and people died from the censorship of correct science policy. From that censorship, the concept of science has been seriously damaged, as we know. Even the best journals in the world, New England Journal, Lancet, Science, Nature, have become contaminated by politics and publish false declarations of consensus in an attempt to suffocate and intimidate debate. That didn't just add to the public's confusion. It didn't just diminish trust in experts. It diminished trust in scientific data itself. As a health policy scholar for over 15 years and a professor at top universities for 30 years, I remain shocked and concerned. First, I have been shocked at the enormous power of the government to unilaterally decree to close by edict businesses, churches, schools, restrict personal movement, mandate personal behavior, eliminate our most basic freedoms without any end and little accountability in the United States of America. But second, I am still surprised at the acceptance by most American people of the draconian rules, restrictions, and mandates that were unprecedented, many of which were arbitrary, destructive, and wholly unscientific. And in the wake of the recent elections, I am even more concerned. Yes, domestic migration indicated a flight toward freedom to states like Florida and Texas and away from California, Illinois, and New York. But of the 11 worst states in the management of the pandemic, including Washington, D.C., 10 of which had the most stringent lockdown policies. 7 of the 8 governors running for re-election were re-elected. Voters vote on a lot of different things, but they certainly did not prioritize liberty. All legitimate leaders should be openly examining policies that severely harmed America's most vulnerable while failing to save the elderly, the group known to be high risk from the beginning. Instead, though, many call for simply forgetting the heinous, unconscionable decisions that were made to close schools and implement reckless lockdowns that killed and destroyed millions. That must not be allowed. Not if we have an ethical society. The public needs to know the truth after all they've been through. And not if we are to succeed in the next pandemic, the next inevitable crisis. And not if we want to restore trust. That requires, as a start, demanding the admission of failure. And that public admission must be demanded to add accountability to those in power so they never impose these reckless, destructive policies again. What can we as Americans do now? If our democracy with its defining freedoms is to survive, it is clear that first and foremost, we need good people, individuals with integrity, and there are many, to rise up. What does rise up mean? Rise up means speak up, as we are allowed, as we are expected to do in a free society. Quote, no fundamental social change occurs merely because governments act. It's because civil society, the conscience of a country, begins to rise up and demand change. Those are words spoken by our current president, Joe Biden. And finally, my message to young people on campuses where I speak all over the country, who usually ask me, what can they do? Well, it's very difficult, and there are many things that they can do that are small but all important. But there's one thing they must never forget, and that's what Chesterton said. Right is right, even if nobody does it. Wrong is wrong, even if everybody is wrong about it. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Scott. I now don my Prospero's cloak to announce the impending conclusion of the more or less sober part of our revels. To see us off in style, I'm honored to invite Rick Graber, the president and CEO of the Lined and Harry Bradley Foundation, to offer us a little toast by way of consummation.
Well, thank you very much, Roger. What a spectacular celebration. I hope you'll agree. On behalf of the Bradley Foundation's Board of Directors and our entire Bradley team, congratulations to Encounter Books for your continued success. It's hard to believe that what started out as an unconventional idea more than 20 years ago has become a publishing powerhouse and a formidable force in the fight for liberty. Little did the Bradley board know back then just how essential Encounter Books would become to the world of ideas. As all of you in this room know or have actually experienced, most major publishers simply won't even consider accepting a book unless it conforms to today's progressive standards. In an America where speech is routinely censored and constrained, Encounter has been consequential to the marketplace of ideas. Take, for instance, the textbook Land of Hope by Bill McClay, and Bill's here this evening. It remains on Encounter's top 10, absolutely. It remains on Encounter's top 10 book list and has been one of its best-selling books of all time. That tells us that there is a demand from parents and teachers for a history book that offers an inspirational yet honest assessment of America's past. Encounter and Bill McClay are meeting this demand by providing a younger generation with the true American story of hope, freedom, and opportunity. And of course, none of this would be possible without Roger Kimball. Roger, thank you for your fearless leadership, commitment to liberty and the Western tradition, and as fitting for an editor, your unparalleled mastery of the English language. And just to make this point, did you all stay with Roger when he was talking about stentorian forces earlier in the evening? Just checking. Seriously, let's raise the glass to Encounter. Somewhere I have a glass. And to the maxim upon which it was founded in its own words, that the printed word can drive intelligent debate and influence the world in a positive way. Cheers. One final housekeeping note. You are invited to stay for cordials and conversation upstairs, where the bar is now reopened for fellowship. Thanks, and hope you had a wonderful evening.